being the paranoid individual that I am, I got Kristin to help me out and start researching biosolids and what's being done in Massachusetts to at least take care of some of our own stuff. I don't know, maybe I'm just naive. I've been in this field 40 years. It just seems crazy that it all goes out of state for us at least. What was the Mass Sludge Survey? It was conducted by the Mass CEC, which is Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and also NEIWPCC, Northeast Biosolids and Residuals Association. And they conducted the survey to understand the current management of wastewater solids in Massachusetts. And they really are trying to evaluate or really prove a point that we need regional facilities to process solids in the state. Right now there's a few facilities like Lawrence, Deer Island that are kind of a model. And they reduce with digesters and they make fertilizers, and I think it's kind of obvious to all of us small folks that just kind of make a cake or send wet sludge out of state that we need to do something like it. But we need help and we need to collaborate with somebody. So I think that's what they were driving at with this. It wasn't just a random survey. It was an online survey. It was, I believe, 45 questions, mostly taken from your annual sludge survey, and it was based on 2018 data. 85 responses, and it represented 96% of the average daily flow in Massachusetts. So 666 million gallons per day in Massachusetts, 640 million gallons per day were represented in the survey. And historical data was used to fill in any gaps, any missing data that they felt was there. Again, pretty big range of facilities, 4.1 million gallons per day here, 310 or so million gallons per day with Deer Island. Another interesting stat in the survey, 93% of the solids produced in Mass are from WRFs with active industrial pretreatment plans. So in general, these industrial pretreatment plans were put in respect probably to your final effluent and trying to hit your numbers with the EPA with your final effluent. If things come to a head with biosolids, it may be important for biosolids. They're going to start testing what's in your biosolids. The state of Maine doesn't want PFAS in biosolids. So it could be important there, so I thought that was an interesting statistic. And another interesting number was septage receiving 173 million, I think that's, 1,600,000 from in and out of state. That's gallons wet sludge septage receiving. So we don't take care of all of our biosolids in state, but yet we take in some septage from out of state. Seems kind of funny, maybe I'm not understanding, but it makes me a little uneasy. So it's obviously a problem, and it was great that they did this survey.
Thanks, Nick. So in 1989, under the Clean Water Act, the EPA set technical standards for the use and disposal of sludge solids. That's 40 CFR Part 503, if you've looked into that. And that gives us three options as to what we can actually do with our sludge solids. Massachusetts facilities can choose from a handful of in-state options, but most of our options are outlets out of state in New England and in New York. The market for managing these solids is dynamic, it's always changing. It's dominated by private industries, and right now the outlets are actually spread thin, and it's raising concerns for actually adequate capacity and rising prices. The three options that we have available in dealing with our sludge solids have all been in use for 50 years or more. They all require significant significant costs in dewatering those solids, hauling those solids, disposing of them, or turning them into a useful byproduct. And as of recently, all three are facing significant challenges. Massachusetts has recycled 30 to 40% of the solids that are produced in the state, and that's led by Deer Island with 34,000 dry tons produced annually. Incineration is another major option in the state, and it's the leading outlet for the state's disposal of solids. And landfill, as Nick mentioned, is still a regular option for some and provides a backup option if any of the facilities run into any issues. So 11 sewage sludge incinerators are operating in New England, with the majority serving southern New England. There are 8 incinerators that take in outside sludges, with Upper Blackstone facility leading the way. At least 77 Massachusetts treatment plants sent their solids to an incinerator. 19 Massachusetts facilities recycled their solids to soil, which is what Deer Island is doing, Greater Lawrence Sanitary District. There's other facilities such as Dartmouth, Ipswich Harbor, and Southbridge. They're composting their own solids on site, while others opt to send their sludge to third-party processing facilities such as Hawk Ridge Compost Facility in Unity, Maine. There's even Irving paper fiber. It's used in soil mixes. It's used to restore barren sites such as gravel mines, back to healthy soils. And like I mentioned, facilities like Deer Island and Greater Lawrence Sanitary District utilize anaerobic digestion to produce a dry pellet for fertilizer. I actually have a sample here. And those meet EPA standards for Class A biosolids, usually with an exceptional quality rating, and that's mostly used in agriculture and turf management. 18% of the sludge solids are sent to landfills. Almost all of those landfills are out of state. And some facilities actually do benefit from a monofill, but those are serving their own communities and aren't taking in outside solids for disposal. The remaining 1% are either used or disposed of in another way or an unspecified way, and that could just be transporting their solids to a larger facility for disposal networks.
What are the costs associated with solids management and disposal? 71 facilities report a total of $43 million spent on solids disposal in 2018. Majority of the respondents expect the cost of solids management to increase by 30% or more in the next 10 years. This is just kind of a graph. You probably can't see it too well, but it's about cost per wet ton, and the average for incineration was $144 per wet ton. Landfill disposal, $106 per wet ton. Land application, $180 per wet ton. And off-site repairs, $270 per wet ton. It shows a very large range, which I think it even cites it in the survey that it's probably because you got people responding to a survey. Some people are taking into account their total costs for running equipment and sludge hauling and all that. Some people are just taking into account the sludge hauling and disposal. So you do have a large range, $21 per wet ton to $432 per wet ton. So, you know, you got to take the findings with a grain of salt, although I think they're pretty correct overall. And land application is still pretty expensive. So at this time, you really got to take a leap of faith and see where things are going and get to something like land application, even though landfill disposal might be cheaper for you right now. It's cheaper for us right now. We have a good price, but we don't like where things are going. Just a quick little thing about Billerica. We used to do composting. We were a Class A composting facility. It was an expensive operation. We did not have a good footprint for it. A lot of fumes, pretty nasty operation for us. A large piece of equipment went down. They didn't want to pay to actually replace it. It was more cost effective to use Fournier presses or a belt filter press, take dry sludge cake and send it away with Casella or whoever else. So essentially we were composting and we went to hauling sludge cake because it was more cost effective. And for a lot of people it's still going to be the case until things really go bad here. This right here is very similar. This is dry U.S. tons. And the cost associated per dry U.S. ton. Disposal, how much it costed. It cost Deer Island $15 million basically to send their stuff to their facility for dealing with their sludge. Typically, 15 to 50% of your operating budget would be your sludge hauling. That's the average. Typical example, say you're $100 per dry ton to haul sludge and take it to a landfill or whatever, times 20 tons per truck, times 260 working days per year if you had one truck a day. That puts you at $520,000 for your sludge hauling. So Billerica, we were around $640,000. It's our highest line item. It's higher than all of our chemicals combined. So it's a big cost for us right now, and we actually have a very low price. You see a lot of people are up in the hundreds for calculated cost per dry ton. We might be in the low hundreds, which is very low based on our sludge characteristics. So people have all sorts of different numbers. Creating a regional wastewater solids processing facility. I think the numbers and the information in the survey really back it up. And they identified 3 areas for a facility. Connecticut River, so it would be the Springfield area, the northeast of Boston basically, and southeast. Hopefully it would be an existing facility willing to host regional needs. And it would have to be very large and have room for expansion and an ability to handle increased volumes and nutrient loads. Obstacles, costs, cooperation amongst facilities, municipalities, complex economics and logistics, objection from neighbors. A lot of people don't want a large composting facility to all of a sudden be built in their backyard. I know that the Springfield area, they've seriously looked into at least seeing what it would take. I don't think the Boston area wants any part in this. I don't think they've made any headway as far as I know. But I think the survey, the information really backs it up.
All right, I'm going to talk about the challenges that are facing biosolids management. So this here is a list of incinerators in New England. So the EPA has come out with new air emissions regulations that's limiting the emission of particulate matter into the atmosphere, as well as placing strict limits on beryllium and mercury emissions. And that's forcing the incinerators to upgrade their facilities in order to meet the new stricter air permit requirements. But some of the facilities, as you can see, haven't made out so well in the deal. the cost associated with upgrading the facility in order to meet the new permit requirements, plus aging infrastructure. They just chose to close down instead of upgrade. It was just not cost effective for them to do the upgrades. And at least 5 incinerators have closed in the past, recently in New England and New York, and those were facilities that were taking solids for Massachusetts facilities. There's also challenges facing recycling some of these biosolids to the soil. The first one is pretty self-explanatory. There's a real stigma about using human waste on your crops, on your lawns. People aren't understanding. They think it's just raw waste, and that's not the fact. It's treated. There's strict regulations on the biosolids that we're making to reduce pathogens, to reduce odors, to reduce vector attraction. Also, the USDA has their national organic program, and that's going to limit the use of, it prohibits the use of sludge solids on organic crops. So now that eliminates where some of our solids can go. We can't use it on organic crops. Additionally, the use of sludge solids is also prohibited on pastures where grazing organic livestock would feed. So you can't use it on a pasture for organic livestock either. The FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act does allow the use of biosolids on crops, but it sets stricter standards as opposed to, say, manures. The manures have equal or greater amounts of pathogens in it, but fewer rules regulating them. Massachusetts Department of Agriculture, that's the 330 CMR. It is now prohibiting the application of any phosphorus-containing fertilizer unless you test the soil first. And that soil test indicates additional phosphorus is needed for growth. Or you can also use that fertilizer to establish a new lawn, but it can only be used in the first growing season. So that's going to limit the marketability and use of biosolids in Massachusetts. We also have PFAS. Those are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're known as forever chemicals. They're persistent and stable in the environment due to the strong chemical bonds. There are over 3,000 chemical varieties of PFAS. They've been in commercial use since the 40s, and they're abundant in our society today. They're found in every American household and used in products such as nonstick cookware, stain-resistant furniture and carpeting, wrinkle-free and water-repellent clothing, cosmetics, lubricants, paint, pizza boxes, popcorn bags, firefighting foams. The ubiquitous broad use of these compounds means that trace levels of PFAS is going to make their way into our wastewater and ultimately into our sludge solids. The concern there is the potential for these chemicals to leach from the biosolids and maybe contaminate groundwater, contaminate food crops. There's a public and political concerns right now about PFAS. It's leading some states to set limits on PFAS concentrations in biosolids. Maine is one of them. They're putting limits. So the MWRA had to meet with the state, get a variance in order to be able to sell our biosolids in the state. But now, if any farmer wants to use our biosolids, their application rate is actually cut in half. And that's how they're getting around being able to still sell it in the state. But they haven't set limits as far as the EPA is concerned yet in the biosolids, because we're still doing research on what those limits should be. So for these states to jump the gun and set these limits before we've been able to, do the scientific research necessary and public outreach and see what what everyone is saying about it. It's kind of setting a precedence, and it's not in a good way. It's also important to remember that the wastewater treatment plants are not producers or users of PFAS. We shouldn't have to bear the cost of the removal of PFAS just by ourselves. So it's important instead to address the true sources of the PFAS contamination, phase out production possibly at manufacturing sites, and find safer alternatives. Landfill capacities are dwindling in the state and in New England also, and the prices are climbing. So to find a reliable outlet for sludge disposal becoming increasingly difficult. Sludge solids are a difficult material for the landfills to manage. It's a wet material. It has odors. It attracts certain unwanted animals. And some facilities, including Turnkey in Rochester, New Hampshire, have actually resorted to requiring notification up to 48 hours before certain facilities can even bring their sludge in for disposal. Then, as some of these landfills close, the cost to the facilities who rely on landfill disposal as an option, those costs are going to begin to rise as these facilities will be forced to haul their sludge further and further out of state and out of New England. There's nothing in place right now yet, but there's also the potential for policies that could limit PFAS-containing waste from disposal at landfills. Could force alternative means of disposal, which is also another increase in price.
Conclusion, we need stable, predictable outlets for sludge and solids. And probably incentives need to be created to encourage the long-term planning. Like I said, right now, if we were to do a cost analysis on whether or not to just make sludge cake and haul it versus building a composting facility or whatever, it actually probably would cost more for the composting, but I think it's pretty clear that we need to start doing something regionally in state for smaller places, to do something to at least reduce. It's a good survey, and we learned a lot from it, and we kept digging.
Any questions?
I'm wondering why the Mass DEP doesn't try to herd the cats in the states and develop policies for regionalization.
That wasn't a question.
It was a rhetorical question.
Yes.
I saw some really high numbers on your cost of disposal for certain municipalities, and I was wondering if you had any insight for why some of them are so high. One of them was over $2,000 for a dry process.
A lot of it's sludge characteristics. I know for a fact that my superintendent was contacted by another superintendent that needed to get a contract with somebody like a Casella or somebody else, and he wanted to know our number per ton. My boss wouldn't give it to him, but he asked him what numbers had been thrown at him, and he had astronomically high levels, and it was because of the sludge that they create in the facilities. It's something that nobody wants, and it could literally be the difference between getting charged $100 per dry ton and $400 per dry ton. I mean, And some places only get pumped out like once a year. Like, I don't know much about the really small plants, but some people aren't continuously loading trucks of dry sludge cake like we are. Some
Yeah,
people,
the high costs were on the
Yeah,
small
yes.
facilities.
like,
Liquid sludge probably.
yeah, like a pond or something, I don't even know, stuff I don't know about, but.
Additionally, going through, we've got two towns that are separated by only a few miles. One's pure septic receiving, one is a mix. We're able to still send our cake.
Yeah.
They can't.
Thank you.
So it happened that fast and it's going to the same place.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's with the percentage of your solids also, in the wet sludge. Because if you send something where it's like a 2 or 3% solid, it's way lower than what they want, and it really doesn't tune on their incinerators. And so for them, they'd rather charge you an arm and a leg.
Yeah, 'cause they have to process so much.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Right.
Do you know what your percentage is on the cake?
We're like 27% dry, and because we were a composting facility, they rated our sludge as being desirable. So with our contract with Casella, they take our stuff to either Maine for composting, or a landfill, or I think they have an incinerator. So because of our sludge characteristics, they're able to put us in that loop with that main composting facility. I think that's why we have a good number. It's something
Pretty good percentage.
But by the time the moisture gets in, we're down around 20 or 19. Because it sits in a bay and then we load the truck. So when it gets to them, sometimes it's more moisture.
That's a really good percent solids, and I think if people do the math, like in Springfield, 1% solids is worth about $125,000 in trucking costs. So it really makes a difference. If you go from 20 to 25, it's a huge amount of money.
Yeah, we think we're doing good with an 18 just on a belt, you know, so it's trying to find the right application to get the most out of
Yeah,
your
no,
skis.
that could make a difference in like your decision whether to upgrade to, say, a centrifuge where you can get like a 30%. When you do the math on it, putting that water in the truck and hauling it makes no sense.
Gotcha.
So a bit of a shameless plug, we have a class in New Hampshire on May 14th